of the Nativity Fast or Advent as a reading for the 26th Sunday after Pentecost, today's reading from St. Paul's letter to the Ephesians is essentially an Advent or a Nativity Fast reading. Did you notice his theme of light, the poetic form, the central position, and the specific content of those words? Awake, O sleeper, and arise from the dead, and Christ will give you light. Give a prominent role to the theme of light in today's reading. All that St. Paul tells us today about the imitation of God, about church discipline, about using wise use of the time, about singing, and about thanksgiving, hence the connection with today's gospel reading, all of these things can be understood as a ramification of his statement, of Paul's statement about the light. And Paul introduces this quotation, awake, O sleeper, as if everyone knew it. Whence does it come? Whence does it come? From where does it come? Well, we don't actually know. Many suggestions have been made. St. Jerome, the hermit and teacher in Palestine, answers in this way. The one who is content with a simple answer will indeed say that Paul must have read this phrase in some arcane prophet, or in the writings called apocryphal. He then brought the text into the open, as he manifestly does in other places, not to substantiate the apocryphal texts, but in the same way that he makes use of verses elsewhere, from Aratus and Meander and others, to substantiate what he says on other occasions. Some less content with this simple answer might argue that the apostle said this as an exhortation to penitence. It is as if he were assuming the role of the Spirit. For my part, this is Jerome writing, scanty as my knowledge is, I have nowhere found this text written in any edition of the ancient scriptures and the texts of the Hebrews themselves. Interesting. Other commentators maintain that this poetic verse, awake, O sleeper, and arise from the dead, and that Christ will give you light, may well have been part of an ancient baptismal hymn. In the early church, you will recall, nearly all baptisms were of adults, confessing their faith as they came out of paganism into Christianity. Perhaps then this verse was chanted as they immersed from the baptismal font, symbolizing their passage from the dark sleep of paganism into the radiant life of Christianity. We know that St. Justin, the philosopher and martyr, and St. Clement of Alexandria, for example, referred to baptism as enlightenment. And they certainly may not have been the only early Christians to do this. In the scriptures, there is a constant play between light and darkness. In common to the various accentuations of this light and darkness imagery in the Bible is the radical and total mutual exclusion of light and darkness. There's no gray. It's light or darkness. Actually, from the very first pages of the Bible, the superiority of light over the darkness is proclaimed. Darkness possesses nothing and lacks everything, and can never prevail in the conflict with the light. Light knows no compromise and depends on no mediation. Light expands, defeats, makes its opposition disappear. Therefore, Jesus is never called or referred to as a mediator between light and darkness, or the reconciler of the two. He is, in today's epistle reading, as in the prologue to the Gospel of John and in the book of Revelation, Jesus is always praised as the victorious light in person, the personification of victorious light. And it is the nativity of that person, of that God-man, the very fleshment of light, that you and I are preparing to celebrate. The words which Paul uses to precede that line that we're looking at are these. All that is revealed is light. All that is revealed is light. Thus proclaiming in magnificent brevity, not only the dimension and the effect of Christ's victory over death, but also the consequence of Christ coming into the world. The light of which St. Paul writes and speaks here produces results here and now, or at least should. If that were not the case, then the light would resemble some remote idea or future state of happiness. And while Paul tells us that deeds done in the darkness are called fruitless, the fruit of light consists of everything he says that is good, righteous, and true. And believers, you and I, are called children of light. By doing what the light produces, by behaving as members of the family of light, we recognize to whom we belong. Light has an ontic status. Its power is outside and above us. We live because of the light, and we can enjoy its blessings. It's not a condition brought about by human awareness, but its benefits include awareness, knowledge, and insight. As a beneficiary of the light, you and I, in turn, are to become living proofs of its power. So the question that I think that is put before us today is simply this: what kind of a proof text are you and I for being a child of the light? What kind of a proof text are you and I to being a child of the light? You and I have been given a responsible part in the present and future acknowledgement and execution of God's will. You and I are not reduced to some type of unconscious or unwilling objects or tools of God. And it's not by our gloomy submission that we disassociate ourselves from the darkness. On the contrary, only by our joy, our jubilation, and our gratitude, again in connection with today's gospel reading, can we reveal our conformity to God's will, even our imitation of God, to which Paul refers in today's reading. How? How do you and I conform to the will and work of God, according to what St. Paul tells us in the reading today? I think he presents us with four aspects of that type of confirmation. First, actually, an act of intellectual activity. Remember how the epistle began? Walk as children of light, for the fruit of light is found in all that is good and right and true. Try to learn what is pleasing to the Lord. Try to learn what is pleasing to the Lord. This season of the Nativity Fast, of Advent, if you will, is a perfect time to discern what is pleasing to the Lord and how you and I should be living that. Second, almost all of the verses following that initial verse contain an allusion to the social character of the life decisions you and I are to be making. As imitators of God, we must show our love and respect, according to Paul. We must show our love and respect all that is fitting for believers. Everything we do should be fitting for believers who have our citizenship in the kingdom of God. You and I are to care for our erring brothers and sisters by disapproving of their evil deeds. Together, we are to sing, we are to thank, yet another connection with today's gospel reading. We have to sing and thank God for all people and all things. In each of these ways, you and I disassociate ourselves from the darkness which has held us captive and orient ourselves to the light which is Christ. Third, our total conduct, not just certain individual good deeds that we might do as we're waiting for Christmas to come. Our total conduct is to distinguish us from perpetrators of darkness. You and I are to bear practical and palatable testimony of our new life in Christ, always, and in every situation. And fourthly, the character of our testimony, of our witnessing to Christ, is to be far from bitter or gloomy or desperate, despite the times in which we live. On the contrary, our testimony is to be full of emotion, of joy, that breaks out into jubilation. When people see us gloomy and down, how are they to detect the light of Christ in us? How are they to detect that light of Christ in us? So to what degree, then, do these four elements that Paul gives us today determine the totality of our existence? The indissoluble unity of our intellectual, social, existential, and festal activities are to distinguish the life of a Christian from that of a purely academic, individualistic, psychological, or mystical association with Christ. Again, I remind us all of what St. Paul writes to us today. All that is made manifest is light. All that is made manifest is light. The revelatory power of light is not only informative, but also transformative. By exposing the realm of evil, light overcomes its power and turns it into light, creates anew and saves all that was held captive in darkness. The Messiah himself is this creative, awakening, liberating light. And the beneficiaries of his coming are those who have been dead in lapses and transgressions. Let's take seriously the imperatives contained in today's epistle reading. These are not suggestions, they are imperatives. Awake, O sleeper, and rise from the dead, and Christ will give you light. Let's make use of this season. Let's appropriate Christ's light, allow ourselves to be transformed by that light, and then let's radiate it. Not just for the remainder of Advent, but for the entirety of our lives. Let's be beacons of Christ's light in our world today.